On this episode of Breaking the Game, Austin and I will be continuing to reveal our NBA tiers. Plus, we're going to give you guys a little bonus content. We're going to be talking about how all of the Houston Rockets won out of Houston and what we think about that. So stay tuned. We'll come right back to you after this break. What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Breaking the Game podcast. I am one of your co-hosts, Stephen Gillespie, and joining me, as always, is my better half, Austin Carr. Austin, how you doing today, man?
I'm doing good, Stephen. That music gets me going every time. I like that intro music. You did a good job with that and gets me excited for the show.
I appreciate
I'm ready
it,
for
man.
today for sure.
It's so funky, and I love it. You know, I'm a big Motown guy. We haven't really talked about music a lot on the show, but I love Motown music.
Nice.
Love Motown music.
I like oldies a lot. I like classic rock. A little bit of hip hop thrown in there. A little bit of everything.
Yeah, me too. I'm pretty well rounded too. I don't get into like the death metals and stuff like that.
Yeah. But I do every once in a while, but not too often.
It's only like when I work out do I like really listen to like music that makes me want to like burn my house down. Like
there you go.
You know what I mean? But
it just works for some reason.
Yeah, but the music does. I think it kind of fits the show. It's not too edgy, but it's still a little bit funky. And I like to think of ourselves, you know, in that same vein. You know, we're not over the top, but you know, we got a little bit of pep in our step, and we got, you know, some good things that we bring to the show. But enough bragging on ourselves, and you know, kind of swapping our musical, you know, preferences and things like that. Austin, we got a great show lined up today, man. We're going to be talking about our tiers. Be sure you, the viewers and listeners, to hit us up on Twitter at hashtag BTG NBA rank, so we can have that exchange with you, and you can just tell us how right we are and how we perceive the game, you know, and what you've learned from us. So,
I mean, there's really no arguments to be made about either of our lists. So
now we can both be right? So there you go. Yep, there we go.
No, it's obviously all subjective, and we love hearing feedback about it. So if we're being honest, you know, be as critical as you think you need to be.
Yep. And I've been married for like almost 10 years. So I know what it's like to be wrong every once in a while. You know what I mean, Austin? And speaking of which, I want to give you and your lovely wife, Ariel, a special congratulations for your wedding anniversary. I wasn't privy to how long you two have been married now. How long has it been?
It was our second anniversary. We've been together 4 years. We've been married for 2.
Man, congratulations. That's incredible.
Yeah, it was a good time. We had a good day. We went and did some shopping, had lunch together, and spent a lot of time together. It was nice.
Excellent stuff, man. It makes me happy to see, you know, two married people, you know, celebrating, you know, their time together, right? That's cool, man. But before I get into your list and my list, it wouldn't be an NBA show if we didn't talk about recent news, right? And I just want to briefly touch on how you're feeling about now that Mike D'Antoni is out of Houston, now that Daryl Morey is out of Houston. Now all of a sudden, these Houston Rocket players want to speak up and talk about how just upset they are with, you know, their playing times, the roles that they're in, you know, their contract situations, you know, decreasing responsibility year in and year out. Like 4 or 5 players have come up and, you know, expressed their disinterest. Austin, how did you receive this?
Well, you asked how I feel about it. First off, I kind of feel like I was right, and you were too, to an extent. We kind of had talked about this before, where we kind of saw the writing on the wall for this Houston team. You know, we even talked on the show about how, you know, the owner jumped ship, the GM jumped ship, the coach jumped ship, and now it seems like the players are doing the same thing. But, you know, when I really think about it, a couple things come to mind. How can everybody on the team have a diminished role? Like who got all that playtime? Who got all that usage? You know, if they're all complaining that they didn't have as big a role as they used to.
Well, you know who complained who did not complain about their role? I'll give you one guess.
James Harden.
You guessed it. You got it right.
And, it's interesting to see him, even mention a possible trade destination list or whatever. And, they came out with a great PR spin on it and said, he's locked in for the season, which, if you can believe that, okay. But, they're just trying to make things sound better than they are. It's just, I don't know. I feel like it's a little bit pouty, like they didn't get the coach they wanted because, we'd heard that they were pushing for John Lucas to be the head coach.
Right.
And it almost seems like, oh man, we didn't get the coach we wanted. This new guy is going to come in and change things. We can't handle that. I need to get out of here. And I mean, Westbrook has a legitimate gripe. I guess he's uneasy about the future plans of the team going forward, whatever. But he hasn't been there that long. But those other guys, like they've had their time to try this style of play. They've been doing it for 4 or 5 years, and I just think they hit their ceiling, and it's not going to go anywhere unless they change some things up. A year and a half ago, I didn't even really know who Daniel House Jr. was, and now he's on here complaining about not getting enough, a big enough role. It's just I feel like Daniel House Jr. was the weirdest one to me because seemed like he had a pretty good year. So
yeah,
I don't know. What are your thoughts?
I mean, he didn't have the greatest time in Orlando. No. If you remember that correctly, but
right. Maybe
whose fault was that, right?
Maybe he's just embarrassed and doesn't want to show his face up there again. I don't know.
To me, it's just all kinds of dirty for these players to wait and express their displeasure now that everyone who is responsible for their displeasure is now gone. Like, why do you wait for Mike D'Antoni and Daryl Morey to leave before you talk about, PJ Tucker saying, I didn't think that my contract was fair. You signed it, guy. You know what I mean? Like, you signed that extension. Right. Eric Gordon says, I'm tired of my role being diminished year in and year out. Okay, well, like, who's responsible for that? Mike D'Antoni didn't renew his deal. You know what I mean? Oh, and by the way, you've been pretty injury prone, right? Like, so they can't push all their eggs in your basket. James Harden and Russell Westbrook, they got rid of Chris Paul and gave away a first-round pick for their troubles in order to make James Harden happy. This was supposed to be, this is going to work because we're friends. You know what I mean? Like, that was like the big twist on this is like, we're going to be even better than Harden and Chris Paul, who almost beat the Golden State Warriors, right?
Probably could have if they weren't for those injuries. But
exactly.
That's always how it goes.
Exactly. Oh, but we're going to be even better than that. You want to know why? Because we're friends. We get along. Now everybody's unhappy. Now everybody and this is the bad part about player empowerment to me. You know what I mean? Because you wait and gripe, like everyone who is at that organization, with the exception of Tillman Fertitta, who is the owner, right? Who, by and large, the only thing that he does is cut a check. Like, he's not like a Mark Cuban. He's not like in the ins and outs. At least it's not, publicly expressed that way. That he is, telling Mike D'Antoni how to coach his guys. He's not telling Daryl Morey who to sign. Daryl Morey is like considered probably the second or third best basketball, manager of roster and personnel, I would outside of like maybe Masai Ujiri and Danny Ainge. Like, he's up there in that tier, right? Like, he's up there with the best basketball minds as far as getting talent, turning deals to where it's more favorable for me than it is for the other team. He's like that, right? So like, all these guys are gone now, and now all of a sudden all these Houston Rockets want to be like, oh, I'm not happy here. I want to leave. And James Harden is so upset that he wants to go back to Philly. Philly is one of the teams that he wants to go to. Now he wants to go to Philly to be back with Daryl Morey, who painted this roster into a corner, and then in an admission or wrong said, you know what? I want time away. I want to spend time with my family. He spent like a week with his family and then went to go to Philadelphia on the East Coast. I mean, it's crazy to me.
Well, the whole thing is just a lot of smoke and mirrors trying to make people look better than they really are. Because at the end of the day, I heard Daryl Morey wanted to pursue other like goals and career paths on NBA radio. Like, a guy that's obsessed with basketball, like literally obsessed with it, is not going to leave a position like that unless he had something else, in his back pocket, or at least in
his age too. Right.
Exactly. He's going to work in the NBA for forever.
Yeah, maybe 20 more years doing the same thing.
Exactly. And, I get what you're saying about waiting until those guys leave to complain. And I think that's why I said I think it's kind of pouty. I think they didn't get their way with who the coach ended up being. And it kind of just seems like now they're going back and like retroactively complaining about something that they should have been complaining about for 2 or 3 years if it was really that bad. And I was kind of always wondering when this was going to happen. I mean, how many NBA players can say they just want to stand in the corner and shoot 2 or 3 times a game and watch somebody take the ball to the hole every single time? Or shoot,
watch James Harden dribble the air out of the ball.
Exactly. And I don't even know that if you ask James Harden if he would tell you that he absolutely loves it. I think he obviously likes getting his numbers. I feel like in the last couple of years, he's kind of matured a little bit, at least from what I've seen in interviews and stuff. And it seems to me like he's a little more worried about winning than maybe he was for the first few years there. Obviously, he cares a lot about getting his numbers. That's for sure. And that's what a lot of NBA players are like.
He did say no to Chris Paul and yes to Russell Westbrook. Like to counteract, this, this thing you have going on. I would like, I don't know. This is like where, and this is we're going to see this here in a minute when we go through our player tiers. Like, people see the game differently based off of, how they interpret, the breadcrumbs that are left, because we never know like the full picture. Like, there's a lot of speculation and concession in this, right? Like, we're going based off of how we interpret, the scenarios and situations that we're privy to, to the extent that we are privy to,
You're exactly right. I was thinking about that with the whole Chris Paul, James Harden thing. Everybody talked about it. Oh, the Rockets got rid of Chris Paul. They didn't want him anymore. Harden said he had to go. It could have been Chris Paul saying, "Get me the heck out of here. I don't want to play for this team anymore. I can't do this." We don't really know. And a lot of times we never will. A couple things that I did want to touch on that you kind of brought, that you reminded me of. I was listening to Gilbert Arenas' podcast. I think it was
No Chill Gil,
or it was either him or Ron Artest maybe. But
I don't know the name of his podcast.
Yeah, but they had John Wall on, whoever it was, and he was talking about like today's players versus back in the day. And he made a good
Gilbert Arenas. I think
he made a good point that. Players today are all friends. They all get along. They all know each other. And they were friends back in the 80s and the 90s, but they wanted to beat each other so bad.
Right.
And it seems like there's only a few guys that are like that anymore. I think most guys are more interested in going to a big, nice city where they can live a nice life and play basketball with all their friends, at least early on in their careers. That's how it's kind of seemed to have been trending. So, I mean, you can say what you want about that. I kind of like players teaming up and player movement a lot. It kind of, keeps things fresh. It's something to talk about. It's something to, fire up the trade machines for.
We've been doing that a lot lately.
Yeah, everybody has. Twitter's like covered with them.
Yes.
But, and then another thing, I was listening to NBA radio this morning, and one of the guys on there was blaming the Rockets owner, Tillman Fertitta, for not listening to Harden and Westbrook and his players about who to hire. Do you think he should listen to the players more, or the GM that he just promoted who's doing his actual job? I personally think if the GM wanted this guy, I don't know that you can blame the owner. I think that's a little ridiculous.
I mean, and it's really, again, perception, right? Like, how do you perceive player empowerment, right? Like, do you think that at this point, and it's always situationally based, right? Like, you've had James Harden forever, Russell Westbrook is a known commodity, and I would argue a diminishing one at that.
Oh yeah.
You have a bunch of role players on this team. They've had their way. You just gave them a season where they got their way. You know what I mean? They got rid of the big guy. They got Russell Westbrook. That, friends are all on the same team together. And what happened?
Same thing that always happens.
Like, eventually it's like a relationship, right? Like, you give all and all and all and all, and the other person just stands there like this, right? Like, you either need to work on that and express and like be able to talk about that in a respectful way to one another, or before you get married, right? You just walk, maybe this is not the person I'm supposed to spend the rest of my life with. You know what I mean? Like, that's how
that's kind of what my thinking was. It's just like, I feel like a lot of times coaches and front offices, part of their job is to protect the players from themselves to an extent, because if LeBron James or Kevin Durant or even Kawhi Leonard handpicked a coach and said, I really want this guy, I'd probably, be a little bit more on board with it than I am James Harden and Russell Westbrook. They've never really won anything. They don't really have that kind of cachet to walk in. I mean, they're stars, don't get me wrong.
Yeah, and one of the best scorers of all time in James Harden. Like, as much as like he rubs me the wrong way, like I will also give him credit. He is a super talented basketball player, one of the best scorers we've ever seen in the NBA.
It's unreal. So if you just really look at his numbers and just take away all the other stuff about him and the winning and losing and just look at his raw numbers, it's unreal.
Or just watch him play, like that too, right? Like both.
He also kind of reminds you. Go ahead.
No, I'm just saying the eye test and the numbers. That's
all. He kind of reminds you of that slightly overweight kid on the playground that doesn't look like he can play, and then he just goes by everybody the whole game, or he's got like you see the old men at the YMCA, they have that old man game, they just know how to play. James Harden kind of reminds me of that. Every year he kind of adds something to his bag of tricks. He gets a little bit better offensively year in and year out. He never fails to add something to his arsenal. So I like that, because to be honest, I don't think there's a whole lot of NBA players anymore that have like a legitimate set of moves. There's a lot of really good shooters and there's a lot of really good athletes that can attack the rim, but you don't see guys with, practicing that footwork like Kobe Bryant did. And like, those post ups,
Carmelo Anthony.
On the elbow, or, like Michael Jordan or Carmelo Anthony, those guys, basketball, the way it was played then, it was a lot more one-on-one. It was, they call it hero ball, whatever, but at the end of the day, you had to be able to take your guy one-on-one and get and score on him. And not a lot of guys really have to do that much anymore. And James Harden does it as good as anybody. I saw another thing on Twitter where they were asking who the perfect teammate for him is. Like, who would be the best running mate for him? I want to get your thoughts, because I think he already had it. I think it was Chris Paul. I think they should have used that opportunity to kind of try to move him off the ball a little bit more and just see what you've got there, because he is an elite in every part of the offensive side of the ball. He could come off screens. He could play off the ball. I don't know if he'd want to, but I think if he tried it and bought in, it would work.
So I got two names that just jump off like immediately to me. And I think personality plays a big part into the perfect teammate, because that's why Chris Paul and he didn't get along. Like they didn't mesh. And they both play different positions. One I think is another guard, and I think it's Kyrie Irving. I think both of those two together could take you off the dribble. They can both pass to each other. Like they can both run the court. Like it would just be impossible, And then the other one I imagine as like the perfect pick and roll partner would be Karl Anthony Towns. I think that would be devastating, But you also got to consider too the ball handling. Like, Klay Thompson is probably the best answer for anybody. Like he's the perfect, like he's genetically engineered to be, the best sidekick ever,
right?
Who could also take over a game.
He doesn't have to move around. You don't have to set screens for him. He doesn't have to have plays run for him. He doesn't even have to be open, really. You can just give him the ball and he's going to hit a shot more often than not. It's crazy.
Yeah. But those two, like without giving it much thought, I mean, you kind of put me on the spot. I feel like I did okay. But, I think Kyrie Irving and Karl Anthony.
Honestly, I was, from what I saw, the answers on Twitter, almost everybody was saying like an elite big man, like Karl Anthony Towns. Not really many people were saying anything about a point guard like I did. I just think, he's so good. It's just kind of a waste to act like he's a one-trick pony. Like he can't play without the ball in his hands, because I think he definitely could.
I think Giannis would also be another one.
Probably. Giannis would be really good with him. Let's be honest. James Harden would go anywhere and pretty much take over on offense.
Steph Curry. Why not Steph Curry?
Well, yeah. Steph Curry is another guy that's why the Warriors work so well. They got two guys that are terrific scorers and elite shooters, and they both don't have to dominate the ball.
Yeah, they're unselfish, but also will drop 30 on you in a heartbeat.
Right.
Like that.
It's crazy. Like some of those games back in a few years ago, it's like out of nowhere they're up 21 points in like 4 possessions. And it's just they hit a 3, they get a steal, they hit a 3, they get a rebound, they hit another 3, and you're done.
One of them drops 20 in the first quarter, the other one drops 20 in the third. Like, yeah, it's. We're getting a little sidetracked off of our conversation, but I love it. I love these conversations, Austin.
But yeah, just to kind of wrap it up, I personally think the best move is, we've talked. What I'm about to say. We've talked about this. I think they need to just fire sales, just get rid of whoever's unhappy, let them go. Get the best thing you can for them. Like you said, they have the leverage. Those guys are on multi-year contracts. They don't have to move them, and it's not like they can sit out.
They don't got to send them wherever they want either. They can send them. They can do what the Spurs did and say, "You want to go to LA? We're sending you to Toronto." You know, like the furthest away from there.
Yeah, and so I think the Rockets have a really good opportunity here to kind of maybe rebuild without really being too bad for very long, because those multi-year deals for those two guys, they are going to get some value in return for them, and it's probably going to be a lot. There's a lot of
the longer you wait too. The longer you wait too, the less years on the deal, the more appealing it is too. Like, especially with Russell Westbrook, right? Like the less years that he has on his deal, the more valuable.
I think there's something to be said about the Knicks just taking him on for 3 years and saying, "Hey, at least we've got a star for 3 years. We're going to have an all-star again." Because
I think Charlotte needs that. I think Charlotte needs that more, to be honest with you.
Maybe I just think it's even as bad as the Knicks have been most of our lives, they've always had a star player. They've always had an all-star or an elite top 10 or 15 guy for most of our lives, at least. And this last couple of years, they're just they haven't really had anything to get people excited to come to the games, and at the very least. And I think that means that matters a lot in New York, more so than maybe other places.
Yeah. And you may be right. I would just we've seen the Knicks do that, try to grab the star and jumpstart a rebuild. I would love to see the Knicks just organically grow. That would be my preference if I had a say in the matter at all. Right. But
I think anybody would prefer it that way. Honestly. I mean, it just kind of feels like the right way to go about it. And a lot of times it does end up working, but that also takes a really good front office and drafting well and making some key smaller signings in free agency. And let's be honest, the Knicks haven't been able to get a guy in that front office that can even come close to doing that. It doesn't seem like. So it's kind of a tall order. Hopefully they can now, though.
We'll talk about this on Sunday when we have Coach Fa and Couch Coach live on our show, when we do a special Coaches Evaluating Coaches episode this Sunday. And we'll be talking about how the Knicks move forward with Tom Thibodeau when they reassign Mike Miller back to being an assistant coach. Not the Mike Miller who played in the NBA, by the way, from the Memphis Grizzlies and Miami Heat, so on and so forth. Right. But they also fired, Fizdale, who, is now, rocking a sweet afro, showing up on ESPN every once in a while. So,
and it kind of bothered me that they did that fast, because Fizdale's a good coach. I mean, what was he supposed to do with that team? It's going to make people look at him and act like he can't coach, and nobody was going to coach that team any better than that.
Yeah, and it's not, he didn't sign those players. You know what I mean? Too.
It's not like Stan Van Gundy in Detroit.
Right, yeah. But we'll talk more about the Knicks and Stan Van Gundy this Sunday when we have our Coaches on Coaches evaluation episode. But
I'm excited about that.
I am too, Austin. We're going to go ahead and transition to what the people are all here for, whether they are viewing or, listening now or later. We're going to finally unveil my tier 5, your tier 5 and 6. And again, you have more players than I do this week. I mean, it's no surprise. By the way, you evaluated more players than I did overall, right? So you're kind of catching up as far as, number of tier that we're on now. Next week should be a lot easier when we're both on tier 4.
I was going to say, we're going to have one more week where we're uneven, and then after that, we're going to have, we'll be 4, 3, 2, and 1 at the same time. So that'll be nice.
It will be nice, but we're going to put that on hold this Sunday. But we're going to continue. We're also going to continue today with what you have as capable starters and high-end starters. And again, you developed some sweet graphics. You have our hashtag BTG NBA rank, which is how you're going to be able to interact with us and let us know how we did. Do you want to go and unveil your starting 5 that you have on your graphics again?
Yeah. So the first one we'll do is capable starters, and the 5 that I picked for the image is Kemba Walker, Derrick Rose, Malcolm Brogdon, Spencer Dinwiddie, and John Collins. It's a pretty guard-heavy lineup, but it looked pretty good when I put it together. So
it does look sweet. You got flames in the background. All your guys look amped up. They look like it looks like the Avengers on here. I mean,
it's funny looking up images for this kind of thing. It's it's hard to ever find a picture of them by themselves where they're not making some kind of like shouting face or like upset with a call. You know, it's the only time you ever see them by themselves in pictures.
Yeah, it is great though, because you get to see some really neat images, or they're always pointing, like John Collins is pointing up. Like a lot of the people or players are very suggestive with their hands in these images as well. You want to move on to your other tier, your tier 5?
Yeah, and I'm glad you caught that. I was I was originally going to try to put one guy pointing towards the name of the picture in each one, but I couldn't find one for this next one. So I've got high-end starters, and honestly, one of these guys on this picture is somebody that, and when I originally did my list, I completely forgot about because he was hurt last year, and that's Klay Thompson. So he's on there with Paul George, Andre Drummond, Jamal Murray, and Jaylen Brown. So that's my starting 5 for the high-end starters.
Yeah, and our president, Chris LeBron, just jumped on and gave you a good attaboy, says sweet graphics. And I wholeheartedly agree. You did a really great job on that, brother.
I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
I kind of like Drummond's face in the bottom corner there. He just looks like confused or scared.
I have that same image for Andre Drummond. I don't know if you caught it of my million players that I have on my graphic last week. I had the exact same picture. I did notice that. But we're going to move on to my graphic that I developed. It's tier 5, which I dubbed super starters. And here,
pretty, man.
I appreciate it. It's got like a 90s skateboard, name to it. I like it. The purple, the light, it's a little dingy around the edges. It's pretty dope. And I'm not going to read all the players off like I did last, again, like I chose to not do last week, because we're going to read off these lists. Actually, we'll go ahead and jump into it.
There you go.
And I'm going to go ahead and blow this image up so the people who are watching right now can kind of see a side-by-side comparison. Who do you got here, Austin, for your entire tier 6 of capable starters?
My tier 6 of capable starters consisted of 19 players. I've got Fred VanVleet, Daniel Tice, Jrue Holiday, Derrick Rose, Kevin Love, Kristaps Porzingis, Andrew Wiggins, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Danilo Gallinari, Kemba Walker, Spencer Dinwiddie, De'Aaron Fox, Tobias Harris, Julius Randle, Jonas Valanciunas, Malcolm Brogdon, Christian Wood, Bojan Bogdanovic, the
Utah one.
Yep, the Utah Bogdanovic, and John Collins. That's my capable starters list.
Excellent. And see here, you have 19 in my tier 5. I have 22 total. You got another 16 in your high-end starters. Who are those players?
My high-end starters are Jaren Jackson Jr., who, man, I was excited about him before he got hurt. He was looking good. D'Angelo Russell, John Wall, Marcus Smart, Jaylen Brown, DeMar DeRozan, Andre Drummond, Pascal Siakam, Klay Thompson, Donovan Mitchell, Paul George, Zach LaVine, Brad Beal, CJ McCollum, Kyle Lowry, and Jamal Murray.
Excellent stuff. And before we move on, our producer just came on the show and said, follow Steven and Austin on Twitter. You can follow me at Steven BTG. You can follow Austin Carr at Austin Carr 10 and the Breaking the Game podcast at BTG NBA Pod. Thank you very much, producer there. Yep. So all in all, you got about 35 players. I have my 22, and I'll go ahead and read off my tier 5, which I dubbed, again, the super starters. I have Zach LaVine, Andrew Wiggins, De'Aaron Fox, Domantas Sabonis, Derrick Rose, Fred VanVleet, LaMarcus Aldridge, Gordon Hayward, Jaren Jackson Jr., DeAndre Ayton, Danilo Gallinari, Nikola Vucevic, John Wall, Joseph Nurkic, Tobias Harris, John Collins, Karis LeVert, Kevin Love, Paul Millsap, Draymond Green, Victor Oladipo, and Rudy Gobert. So again, Austin, we don't always agree. We do have some variance here in who we have where. Upon first glance, do you have any sort of beef or, we don't really argue here on the show, right? But do you have anything that you don't necessarily agree with?
I'm not going to pull up my Shannon Sharp voice on you there, Skip. No, don't worry. I do have one guy, though, that's on your list that I don't like, and it's Draymond Green. But a lot of it is probably just personal bias because I've just never been a fan of his. But really, honestly, looking at his numbers the last 2 years, I know they weren't trying to win last year, and everybody was hurt, and he wasn't, probably going to do anything anyway. But it's just rare that you see a guy he's not old. He's not like he's at the end of his career. It just loses shot completely. And in the last 2 years, he wasn't ever like a lights out shooter, but he was capable of, over 33 or 4% from three. And, he shot like 24 or 28% or something this year. He had a bad shooting percentage overall. He had the highest turnover percentage in the NBA. He was actually at the very bottom of my list until you reminded me of a few guys that I forgot about and I bumped him out. So, that's one of the ones that you have a little bit higher than I would. Obviously, but the rest of your list is pretty solid. I mean, there's a couple guys I would probably move up, but not too much. I think Sabonis belongs probably a little bit higher.
Now,
he did make an all-star team.
Yep, he did make an all-star team, right? And there are a couple names on this list who have been on all-star teams before too, right? Like Vucevic is on there, John Wall. Who else on here? Paul Millsap, Kevin Love, LaMarcus Aldridge, Gordon Hayward, Derrick Rose, a former MVP. Like, there are a lot of established players right here, right? But the reasoning why I have the players where I have, and again, I try to adequately title my tiers to where you can just read the names on the list and then look back up and say, okay, these are super starters, right? Like, you have capable starters and high-end starters, and that's interesting to me that you went from fringe to capable to high-end, right? Me, I just went with steady starters, like guys who will constantly contribute. Super starters is where I started getting into guys who received a little bit more accolades, right? And that's, when I just gave you that list of names. Draymond Green, multiple-time champion, has been an all-star before, defensive player of the year. He's still a very, even though Golden State all around was bad defensively last season, he was still on a bad defensive team, right? Like, with nothing but young talent and, undrafted and, unproven names, right? He was still pretty sound on the defensive end. And I think, also a little bit of projection went into this, right? Like, if you remember when we did our, preseason award shows, our way too early NBA awards, I think that Draymond Green's going to have a strong bounce back season. It just, to me, it was no secret, to a lot of folks what he was trying to do last season. The year prior, I'll give it to you, right? But they also had chemistry issues where he and Kevin Durant weren't getting along during the year. DeMarcus Cousins was in and out of the line. There was a lot going on with that team, and a lot of people had uncharacteristic seasons that year. It wasn't just Draymond, right? So, but even through all that struggle, they were still very successful, and Draymond Green is a big part of that, right? He initiates a lot of the offense too. Like, eye test went into it a lot for me, specifically for Draymond Green, because you can look at the numbers and immediately become disenchanted with him, right? Like, but you got to remember this guy's role. You have to remember who's all coming back this season. You have to remember that they're either going to bring in a really talented rookie or they're going to be adding another player to make them even better. He's going to be able to get his assists up. His defense is going to be there. His rebounding is going to be there. He might even give you 8 to 10 points a game. So I think that with that being said, I think under super starter, because my next tier up, I labeled demi stars, and I think that's too gracious for Draymond Green. But I think somewhere between a demi star and a steady starter, which is where my super starters are, that's where Draymond Green lives.
Hey, and if you're going a little more on total body of work, 3 all-star appearances in a row, on one of the best teams ever, he was pretty much the vocal leader and kind of the heart and soul of that team to an extent. I'll give you that for sure all day. I will admit, for everybody except LeBron James, I did this based off of just last year. For some reason, LeBron just got special treatment because he's LeBron, I guess. I don't know. But I just kind of realized that while we were talking about it now. He's the only one that I didn't solely base off of like last year. But, you made a couple of good points. He was on a really young team, and young guys don't defend well in the NBA. They're just, it's just a fact. Most of them don't. And especially undrafted, late second round guys, they weren't picked up because they were going to be defensive studs. They were picked up probably because they were going to be in the G League scoring 25 points a game. And the other point you made is I do think Draymond Green's going to be poised for a big bounce back year, especially after all the smack he was talking about how they didn't need KD and how good they were without him. I think he's got to he wants to back it up, and I think he's going to. So I agree with you. You did make a good point there. I do think he's going to have a bounce back year. It's just the numbers when I looked at them, they were.
Oh no! Did I lose you, Austin? Austin, did I lose you? I think that I lost my co-host. All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead while we're waiting for him to kind of get settled back in here on the show. I'm going to go ahead and talk to you guys a little bit about some areas in which I kind of disagree with Austin. And when I gain him back, I'll see what I can do as far as getting him here back on the stream. But some areas where Austin kind of confused me a little bit is one, Daniel Tice right now. He is listed as a capable starter as opposed to a fringe starter, right? So it's nothing that I think is too terribly like egregious, right? But if you remember, Daniel Tice was before last season essentially was just a kind of contributing role player, right? He comes into a proven Boston Celtics defensive system that makes everybody really look better. And we actually kind of talked about this offline on the on Twitter, where we talked about how Isaiah Thomas, Kemba Walker, and Kyrie Irving kind of benefited from a really strong defensive system that has been built in Boston. And I think Daniel Tice is kind of benefiting from that a little bit this season, right? But you have to kind of call it how you see it. He did prove himself to be very well. He was a capable starter and was so for the majority of the year. But I wonder how much of that was because of his own ability as opposed to specifically, a Boston system. And Austin, glad to have you back.
I think my modem just like reset itself or something because the whole internet just went down and it couldn't reach anything. And I just ran a diagnostic and it fixed itself. So sorry about that.
No, it's all right. I was shooting from the hip. I was just explaining to the, the viewers and the listeners. I'm kind of looking at your list, and the first one that comes to mind is Daniel Tice. It's not a big gripe for me, but you have him listed as a capable starter, which to be fair, if you're judging solely based off this past season, he did prove himself to be a capable starter. Do you think that had more to do with his talent or the fact that Boston just seemingly has a great defensive system that really doesn't get talked about that much? And I was explaining to, our viewers and our audience, right, that we were talking about offline earlier about how Kemba Walker, Isaiah Thomas, and Kyrie Irving kind of benefited from being the point guard in the system. And I think Daniel Tice may have benefited a little bit from Boston's defense too, because prior to the season, he was just kind of a middling role player. And now he's jumped all the way to a capable starter for you. What was kind of your reasoning for that?
Well, I just think he showed me a lot this year. Like you said, he's a very undersized center. He doesn't belong in the position that he plays doing what he does. Sometimes I just like guys that play with a lot of heart and that look like they shouldn't be there, but are anyway. Or, I just kind of maybe gave him a little bit of a bump for that. But I think his advanced numbers, let me look at it real quick to be sure, but I'm pretty sure his advanced stats are pretty on par with everybody else I have in that tier. Like player efficiency ratings and things like that. His counting numbers aren't the greatest, but he brings a lot to that team. I mean, let's be honest, like Enes Kanter is a pretty good scorer in the NBA, and he can't even get on he doesn't even get on the court. And so how bad is he defensively? Because Daniel Tice doesn't look like he should be a good defensive center, and he is fairly good. At least he was.
Well, he's also pretty athletic. He's before his injury, I would say he had more leap, but he still's got a good amount of bounce in his step. I think that his athleticism helps out. He is, like you mentioned, he's about 6'7", 6'8", which is hardly what you're looking for in a starting NBA center as a rim protector.
And that I do kind of still feel that hurt them towards in that series with Miami.
Oh, it certainly did. I think
they could have used another big man to put in there. And Robert Williams just wasn't quite ready. He had some flashes, but he could be on this list in a year or two. But just like looking at his numbers last year compared to his career numbers, he had a 60% effective field goal percentage, which is kind of what I see as like a cutoff for like that's a really good year for guys when they're above 60%. He had 18 for his player efficiency rating, so a little bit above average. It's pretty on par with everybody else in this group. But the big one for me. The big one for me was the win shares. He's got 6.5 for the year, and I believe that puts him in like the top 50 or 60 of the entire NBA for total win shares for the year, which, again, no metric is perfect, but it is kind of a quick way to put a number on how much a guy actually does affect his team's winning and losing. And it's something that I kind of used a lot to determine, like, okay, does this player go above this player? Does this player belong in this category or this category? Because he was in my last category, just off the top of my head when I was just looking at it. But yeah, James Harden had 13 win shares, and then there was 4 other guys with more than 10 or more, and his 6.3 put him at 27th in the NBA in win shares.
Right.
So that was probably a big part of what I was thinking when I did that. Thinking back on it now, like that surprises me just looking at it now. He had more win shares than TJ Warren, more than Gallinari, more than SGA, more than Joel Embiid.
Well, so it kind of it's not really surprising to me, right? Because when you think about how win shares are formulated, it's basically just like a it's basically like a plus minus almost, where it's more of a team. To me, like those types of numbers speak more to like team success, right? Because yes, like individual statistics do matter, right? But also he's the beneficiary of spending a lot of time with guys like Jason Tatum, Kemba Walker, Gordon Hayward, Jaylen Brown, and because you have to have like all of those guys contributed to their team winning more games than those aforementioned players that you named, right? And being the beneficiary of playing alongside those guys, of course, his win shares would be up higher than some of those, bigger, more attractive names, if that makes sense.
Right. And I mean, honestly, if you just think about it logically, a team that wins 60 games is going to obviously have more win shares than a team that wins 30. Correct. So it does factor into it. But just the fact that he's 27th overall in the whole league, Boston wasn't, the number one team record wise. It's not like they blew away the competition and he was just, buoyed by everybody else. He did benefit from that for sure. But, you can say that about any team.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's why I'm just saying, like,
the tails on that roster.
Yeah. The tails to your head of that coin that we're talking about, right? Like when you just look on the other side, like, and that's why there's no exact formula. Like even the eye test, right? Like you'll look at an eye test and be like, oh man, this guy can really dribble the ball. Oh, this guy can really shoot. But like, how efficient is he? Like how does he hurt the other players around him? Does he take the ball, out of a guy who's, actually a better shooter than he is? How does that affect the team? Right. So like when there's people who talk about like the eye test or like analytics and stuff like that, like you can find glaring holes in each theory. That's why you need all of these, to make an effective and informed decision, right?
Right. And that's exactly what I tried to do. At first, just thinking about him and thinking about what I saw him do this year. Yeah, he did a lot of things that I liked, but you and I are really into basketball and we watch it a lot and we study it. A lot of casual fans see him and probably think, they need to get rid of him and get a nice big defensive center. What's he doing out there? But they don't see the little things like some people like us do,
like setting screens.
Right. So I kind of tried to take that into account a little bit when I was thinking about him from just an eye test point of view. To an average fan, he probably doesn't look like anything special. And then the advanced stats are really good for him. So the truth probably lies somewhere in the middle, in between the two. And so I tried to reflect that as much as I could. I will say though that analytics did drive a lot of not my overall like tiers, more so when I actually ranked every player versus each other. Like that was basically the deciding factor in a lot of those situations.
Which is fair because like and you're not saying anything that general managers and president of basketball operations don't say. Like a lot of people look at those specific numbers, right? So I mean, again, this is we both have the same cake. We just cut it the way that we want to eat it, right? Like that's really what it comes down to.
And what kind of cake is it?
It's I mean, for me, it's buttercream vanilla cake. I'm allergic to chocolate, so.
Oh man, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I mean, my wife doesn't have to share, right? So
there you go. My wife might be allergic to chocolate. She hasn't eaten it in quite a while because it was making her sick. So something you guys have in common.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm still alive, so I think she'll be okay. So
good to know.
Absolutely. And again, Daniel Theis, like for this season, absolutely, I agree with you, was a capable starter. I was kind of just curious on that because I could see somebody who isn't as up to snuff on basketball as us being like, I've heard of almost every other play on here. Who the heck is Daniel Theis? You know what I mean? Like kind of how you were saying earlier.
Right. And to your point about, analytics not being perfect. I told you about this, but this will probably make me sound even crazier than I already do. The other night I couldn't sleep. I read an 83-page math report from some researcher at, I think he was Harvard or Yale, on trying to determine, using a million different stats, running this model that he made 10 different ways, try to determine if you could tell how good an NBA player was going to be based on college stats and which stats actually made the biggest difference. And every time they ran it a different way, or like, one time they'd run it for your whole career, one time they'd run it for just your senior year or just your freshman year, because most NBA draft picks come out after their freshman year. Right. They were complete, like, they even added in things like what team they played for. And it seemed like when you ran the freshman seasons, the players that went to Kentucky and Duke, that mattered more than almost every numerical stat. But you ran those same numbers with the same players for the same year, with the one thing changed in the model, and it was completely different. So basically, they were just saying they used like the highest end math that they knew how to use. They used every different way they could, and they really couldn't get too much of a correlation between the two to really determine what is gonna, make a player good. So I don't think there's any real way to just look at numbers and be able to discern, the game very well.
There's what we call a human element involved, right? Like
exactly.
A lot of it is just the players, give a darn, what I mean? Like how much they want to be great. Like how much does success in college or success in high school affect, how their work ethic moving forward. Like some people are perfectly fine being the best basketball player to ever come out of their high school, and then they kind of pay for it in college, or vice versa.
Go ahead. It's amazing to me to see how often guys flourish as the second or third guy, but as soon as they're thrust into that bigger role, it either overwhelms them or just something changes, or vice versa. There's some guys that just don't do well as the second banana, and then they get a shot, and next thing you know, they're trading the guy that was injured or that was out that gave him that chance to get there to be number one, right. And you never would have thought that. So it's interesting to see, that's what you mean by the human element of it for sure. And if it was all numbers, Russell Westbrook and James Harden would have like 6 rings combined by now if all they cared about was stats. Russell Westbrook had insane 3 years in a row.
Yeah, so, Giannis is probably supposed to be an NBA champion right now.
But something happens to those guys in the big moments. They're not themselves. It's just like you said, it's the human part of it,
human element that you can't quantify, correlate, or account for, right? So it's impossible. But again, we do our best. We're all given the same cake, and I'm not going to walk down that analogy again. All right, so going down to your capable starters, I got 2 names. Actually. Yeah, I'll say 2. I got 2 names that I think should be higher. And again, like I feel like I kind of know your reasoning for putting them there. I know that it's a lot of analytically driven data in here. But Kristaps Porzingis and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. I think that Shai Gilgeous-Alexander had a great season, and I think that you would agree with me. I think that he did prove himself to be a capable starter. But I think he's gonna be given more of an opportunity in Oklahoma City moving forward in the immediate future, right? I know that prognostication probably didn't go into this as much as some other areas, right? But like if you look at how Shai did last season with a limited role, and now he's going to be coming into Oklahoma City, probably the captain of the offense, learning underneath Chris Paul. If you could fast forward it, to, through the future, watch SGA play and then come back and fix your list, do you think that he's still going to be a capable starter by the time the year is done? Or do you think that he's a capable starter coming into the year?
No, just to get that out of the way, I don't think really hardly anybody will be right where they are next year. I think it'll change a lot. I mean, there'll be some guys are who they are, but someone like him, like he's probably one of the 10 or 15 guys I'm most excited about in the NBA. He's on the right part of his career to already be doing this good. He's only going to get better. I think he's going to be a multiple time All-Star when it's all said and done, especially once, you see like the role he had this year and what he was able to do. And when he gets out from under Chris Paul, whenever that does happen, I think he's going to flourish even more. But just, this year for based off of last year, not too much really how I think this year's going to go. It was more just kind of what I saw from them last year. And I just felt like that's where he fit. I think he's already a capable starter in his second year in the NBA. That's a big deal to me.
Yeah, drafted where he was too, I mean, I think he was 12th or 13th, yeah.
He compares really favorably to some of the guys on this list. So he probably could be higher. Do I think he's better than Andrew Wiggins already? Yes. Do I have Andrew Wiggins ahead of him? Yes. So, it's not a perfect
ever system. So slightly. Right.
It was back and forth, and I kind of almost feel like I just wanted to reflect my thoughts on Andrew Wiggins there more, that he's not as bad as the media is kind of making him out to be. Like,
which is a fair take.
Everything I hear about him is that he's just going to be this negative for their roster. He's not going to have the usage rate and the role that he had in Minnesota. He's not going to be the worst shooter in terms of volume in the NBA because he's not going to be taking that many shots. He's going to be a pretty capable third or fourth option, I think. So, I just felt like he gets kind of a bad rap. So,
fair enough.
To get off point. Porzingis was a big factor in it, was injuries. He can't seem to stay healthy, and I do think health is a skill. To an extent, you can kind of evaluate it that way. It's something to be said about LeBron James missing 20 or 30 games to injury in the last 10 years, and it was all like last year.
Yeah, most of them were last
season. He almost never gets hurt, and the way he plays and how often he goes to the rim. And people can say he's a flopper, and he does sometimes, but that's part of the game too.
A lot of times, NBA player flops.
A lot of times, people forget he's 6'8", 260 pounds, going full speed, and this dude just grabbed him and yanked him to the floor with one arm. Like that's a big time collision, no matter if you're flopping a little bit or not. Like he's just a big dude, and for him to never really get injured, that says something about he's doing something right. And sometimes it's just genetics and you can't help it. Like Greg Oden didn't do anything wrong to cause his injuries or anything. He had bad feet. And I'm worried that Porzingis might have bad knees. And if he does, that's a kiss of death for a big man.
Okay. Which I was even kind of thinking that too. Like, I mean, you can't talk about Kristaps Porzingis without immediately, or not even immediately, but maybe your secondary or tertiary thought is injury. Because he got injured in New York. He was, obviously they traded and acquired him while he was injured, and they were kind of betting on him being right when they had him and Luka together. So, he did play extremely well when he did play this year. So I was curious as to, I kind of had a suspicion, but I just kind of wanted to draw that out of you a little bit.
I think a lot of it was, when thinking about it, when he's out there, he adds a lot of value, but how much value can you add when you're playing 50 games a year instead of 82? I mean, there's a ceiling to what you can do if you're not out there the whole season.
Kawhi Leonard won a championship. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
But that's probably more the exception, not the rule, right?
Right. So, we saw what happened this year.
Yeah. All right. Well, under your high-end starter list, I got two guys that I want to talk about. And I think the opinion of and it's interesting that they are in the same tier, because I think that when you look at one guy, you would say, oh, wow, like this guy is so much better than this other player, right? Like why is he even in this tier? Like maybe he should be significantly higher. And that's Paul George, right? Playoff P. I know that the opinion of him has soured, especially, with the way that he performed in Oklahoma City with getting, one of the luckiest shots in NBA, history from Damian Lillard putting out the Oklahoma City Thunder. And then again, another lucky shot, crazy shot, by Luka Doncic in the playoffs, and then getting put out by Denver. It's, the Clippers were supposed to, take LA, and, I thought very highly of them. I thought that they were going to, win a championship this season, and boy, was I wrong. I'll admit that I was wrong. But Paul George as a high-end starter, do you truly feel that way, or is that just the way that kind of the formula, or the just the way the information was presented to you? It's just like, okay, this is what he is.
I try to make my own case for each guy. I try not to listen to what the media say too much, but I do kind of feel that he is more the exception to my my formula for doing this than anything. Because if you just look at his numbers, yeah, he belongs higher than this.
Mhm.
But I mean, he had a chance to beat the Heat in Indiana, and he choked. He had a chance when they were in Oklahoma City. They had two guys that were in the top three or four for MVP voting, and he choked. And this year was a total choke job by that whole team.
Yeah,
and it just seems like I would love to be the Paul George of my workplace, because he's pretty good. He's good at his job, and everybody acts like he's amazing at his job.
Mhm.
When in reality, in the big moments, he's not really that great. He does add a lot of value on both ends of the ball. He does play really well. He's going to have, probably 15 or 20, 30-point games. He's probably going to guard one of the better players on the other team. So yeah, just traditional overall stats, he definitely would be higher than most of these guys on this list. But that's where just the overall narrative around him and what he's done and what's happened to him in these games, like you said, those crazy shots. But it was also, he brings it on himself. He makes up his own nickname, calls himself Playoff P, and then has
waiting for
2 or 3 of the worst playoff performances in recent memory. He's in a Gatorade commercial hitting a game-winning shot in slow motion when he's never hit a game-winning shot in the NBA. And even I think 2 or 3 games after that commercial came out, he had a chance at a game-winning shot and he absolutely bricked it. And it's just, sometimes guys just can't answer the call when they're needed to for whatever reason. And I think that's what you're seeing with Paul George, because honestly, just about every other guy on this list, if he's playing his absolute best and at his peak, potential, he's way better than probably everybody on this list, save maybe 1 or 2 guys.
I was going to say maybe 2 to 4 guys, but I mean, that's again, preference, right? So,
but at the end of the day, Jamal Murray turned it on in the big moments. Donovan Mitchell did the same thing
against each other.
Zach LaVine and Bradley Beal haven't really gotten an opportunity to, but they compare pretty favorably statistics wise with Paul George, and at least we haven't seen them fail. You know what I mean? We don't know what's going to happen if they get in that moment yet. We kind of do. The book's kind of out on Paul George, I think. And I feel like for a long time he was underrated, and then he went way overrated, and now he's going to kind of fall back to where he really belongs.
Okay. Yeah. And just to be fair, he's in the same tier as Klay Thompson, of, multiple time champion, one of the best, microwaves in the NBA. But the guy that I want to bring up, and I'm sure you probably know where I'm going. This is, he's a darling in my eyes, and that's Marcus Smart. He's my reigning glue guy of the year. I love Marcus Smart. I love that you have him as a high-end starter, right? You actually had him higher than I did, because I love Smart so much because he does everything that nobody else wants to do.
Exactly.
And he can give you more than that, right? So, you have Marcus Smart, and I'm going to read some of these other names. I know that you already said it. Marcus Smart is in the same tier and ahead of some guys such as Pascal Siakam, Klay Thompson, Donovan Mitchell, Paul George, Zach LaVine, Bradley Beal, CJ McCollum, Kyle Lowry, and Jamal Murray. Jaylen Brown, his teammate, D'Angelo Russell, John Wall, he is DeMar DeRozan. He's in this company, and a lot of people may be surprised to see him here, right? Why does he make sense being here to you?
For starters, I think he's the best perimeter defender in the NBA. I think that was a big part of it for me, is just the value that he adds without even ever having to touch the ball. And it's not like he can't score. I mean, if you guys, anybody listening remembers him in college, he was one of the leading scorers in college in his senior year. He can really score the ball. He just knows that's not what this team needs. And when we had Lee on, we were talking about the draft, we talked about Tyrese Halliburton. He just was talking about how he knew his role, and you don't see a lot of young guys coming in that are willing to take whatever roles available to make the team better. And Marcus Smart has done that since day one in the NBA. He was the top 5 pick, wasn't he? And, he was, everybody thought he was going to be this high scoring star guard, and he's turned into a defensive, player of the year candidate year in and year out. He can get you those big points when you need him. He hits big shots. He's not afraid to take them. I think on a team that has a lot of fairly big personalities, he's definitely the vocal leader and the heart and soul of that team. You know, you put it best when you made him the glue guy of the year. Like, I can't think of a better just like poster boy for what I consider a glue guy. But he's almost too good to be a glue guy. He's
almost outperforming that.
So understands what his team needs from him to win that he's able to just do whatever they need, and that's hard for a lot of guys.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree.
I took a lot of that into account.
Yeah, and you were slightly incorrect. He was 6th overall.
Oh man,
draft. So right there. But yeah, I love Marcus Smart. Like I have slowly become just a Boston Celtics fan in general.
I hate to say it, but I have too.
And it's crazy because like I've never been like a Boston Celtics guy, but like when I think about like who were one of the coaches that I respect the most in the NBA, it's Brad Stevens. When I consider, you know, a guy like we were talking about, my glue guy of the year, Marcus Smart. How can you not like watching him? You know, one of my favorite players just to watch in the NBA. You could put him in whatever jersey you want, and it's Jason Tatum. You know, I love Jaylen Brown. I just so much about the Boston Celtics I like. I just get excited when I watch them, and it's not born out of anything else other than just pure respect and appreciation for what their players and coaching and their general manager do, and like how, you know, everything about the team is just like it's really hard to not be able to respect and appreciate. So
right. I'm with you on that, man. It's even harder for me to admit that I love watching.
That's a Laker fan.
I will just do my best to pretend it's not green and white out there and just watch the players, because one thing I have gotten better at as I've gotten older is appreciating good players regardless of who they play for. Yeah, if they're playing the Lakers in the finals, I want Jason Tatum to go 0 for 20 every game. You know, I'm just going to be honest. That's what I want as a Lakers fan. But in terms of a fan of the game, obviously I want him to be at his best and the Lakers to beat him anyway. But you know, that's neither here nor there. It's just Jason Tatum was a guy you and I even talked about. I made it like a point not to really watch him when he first came into the league because I just don't like the Celtics. I never did. And the more and more I watched and the more he got better, you just can't help but be excited about this team. They're all still young, or, you know, they're on the right side of 30 at least. Kemba's a little bit older, but the other 3 or 4 are all pretty young. And, you know, how can you not be excited about a young team that's so good that they've got a guy in Gordon Hayward who averaged almost 18 points a game last year, and every fan of the team wants him out, wants him gone. We got to get rid of him. You know, a lot of teams would love to have a Gordon Hayward. And
I think Kyrie Irving the year before.
Yeah, like, that's a different story. I don't know if a lot of teams would want Kyrie Irving, to be honest. I think a lot of guys, maybe the players would. The fans, I don't know. I think he rubs a lot of fans the wrong way.
You may be right. You may be right.
But, you know, it's just crazy to me to think about that. Like, they don't even really have much of a role for him going forward if they want their other young players to expand their game even more. And, you know, he's still a really good player.
Yeah. And what I love about Marcus so much, and like just eye test only here is what I'm saying. Like, if nobody else is hitting, Marcus Smart can come out there and just crank some threes and hit some, like in the bubble, man. Like, he was one of their best players, if not their best player, for several games. You know, and oh, by the way, then he'll go and guard Pascal Siakam.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, he'll carry an offense and then go and guard a guy who is like,
let's be honest,
taller.
He made Pascal Siakam look kind of bad too. He
absolutely
bullied him. He overpowered him, and he's, you know, it's crazy to see. And it's just like, I like that. You know, I think, you know, that shows what he's got. You know,
he's a dog.
You know, he's got a big heart. He's a dog. And, you know, like you said, one of those games against Toronto, he was like, hadn't made a shot for 3 quarters and then hit 4 or 5 threes in the 4th quarter just to start the quarter. Like, he's not afraid to take those big, crazy shots, even when he's not hitting. And, you know, that's not always great, but I'd rather have a guy that's confident in himself enough to take that shot than someone that's on the fence about whether he should any day of the week. Because just to make it to this level of basketball, you have to know how good you are. Otherwise, it's never going to really work. I heard a story about Duncan Robinson. Apparently, had one of his friends from high school come stay with him in the bubble, and like freaked out like a giddy schoolgirl when LeBron came up to him and like dapped him up and said, "What up, Dunk?" And you know, he was on the NBA radio talking about how he doesn't feel like he belongs in the NBA, like he's not living his own life. And you know, the guys on the radio show were saying that that's kind of a bad thing for him, because until he's never going to be as good as he can be until he realizes that he does belong. And that's where we talk about those guys that are like delusional, that they're always going to be the best.
Psychopaths,
right?
Jimmy Butler.
Have a little of that, and if you don't, it's like imposter syndrome. You're never going to reach your potential.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and there are some exceptions to those rules. Like, you never really saw Tim Duncan demonstrating that he was like one of the best to ever do it. You know what I mean? Like, there are on occasions, right? Like some guys who are just kind of happy to be there and just will quietly become one of the best to ever do it. Like I said, right? But
yeah, Tim Duncan almost kind of seemed like he just knew how good he was and just didn't have to say anything. Not even that he was just happy to be there. More like he's just like, you can't touch me anyway. I don't even need to talk.
It's like that upset players more than anything. You know,
right?
That
I'm out here not saying a word, hitting 1940s bank shots on you, scoring 30 points a night.
Yeah, and putting up 5 blocks a game, like. And it's just kind of like, oh, hey, man, like, you're having a really good game, you know. Thanks for coming out. Appreciate you, competing against us today, you know.
Right. I have a couple guys I want to kind of talk about on your list a little bit.
Please.
Nothing too crazy. One of them is, we already talked about Draymond, Paul Millsap. I'm a little down on him. I think his best days are behind him. You know, I think he's coming down towards the tail end of his career, so to speak. And his numbers dropped off considerably this last year. He wasn't as big of a part of that Denver team as he's been in the past. And I don't know. Super starter doesn't sound like it fits for him.
Yeah.
But I don't know if he belongs in the tier below it either. It's just, he's one that I had lower that I noticed you had on there.
Yeah. And to be honest, like, he's a name that I was like, what side of the fence do I put him on, right? Like, do I call him just a capable starter? Or do I say super starter, right? And last season was probably the biggest year where you could like probably drop him down a peg, right? But Denver's defense was one of the best defenses in the entire NBA. And let me just run some names by you just to kind of see what you think of them defensively. Jamal Murray, what do you think of him defensively?
Kind of a windmill, just kind of like spins around when the guy goes by him.
Okay.
Spins like a top.
What about Nikola Jokic?
He's like a loaf of bread, just kind of stands there. He's completely unathletic. Unless he gets a great jump on the play, sees it coming, you're pretty much going to torch him every time.
Okay. Michael Porter Jr.
Capable, doesn't seem like he wants to. I think he'll get there
right now in his career.
Right now, not very good.
Okay. Would you agree that those are the 3 guys that you're probably looking to build around down the line? Sure. And like, we're probably 3 of the better contributors, like Will Barton. Well, how would you describe him defensively at the position they had him? He was guarding small forwards.
Yeah, he's out of position for sure. I mean, he's better than he doesn't belong in the same category with those other 3, but I get what you're saying. He's not a great defender either.
Right. So what made Denver's defense as stout as it was Paul Millsap, the unsung hero of this team, the elder statesman of this team. He did so much that where you can play a defensive liability at center and still be one of the best defensive teams in the NBA. Your guards are letting people go by them. You know what I mean? And like, he didn't do anything extremely sexy on the offensive end, but he's still very capable. He's evolved into a great spot up shooter. He's a capable passer. He's a great pick and roll partner, because he can pop and roll. He's a very decent rebounder. Doesn't really need to rebound because what they do is they like to let Jokic rebound and kind of bring the ball up the court and let everyone kind of, get set in the offense, right? So, and it helps Jokic kind of catch his breath a little bit, right? So, I think when I look at all the intent, like when I say look at the intent, like the stuff that you can't really quantify or correlate, right? Like when you look at the way that Denver's defense is consistently one of the best in the NBA, but you look at that cast of players that they have on that team, it all boils down to, Paul Millsap. That's why I call him a super starter, because when you can elevate a team's defense in such a way, almost like an Al Horford, a couple seasons ago in Boston, right? Like he didn't get a lot of blocks or steals or anything. He was just a hustle guy and a deterrent. Like, and that's how I look at Paul Millsap.
Yeah. And it's, if you think back a few years ago, he was an offensive nightmare for teams too. He scored a lot more, and he doesn't look like he would be an elite defensive player either. I mean, he's a big, in shape, athletic guy, but he just doesn't look like, an elite NBA defender in today's game. And he is. You're right about that. And, he's had a lot better career than I think people would have, projected for him.
Yeah, as a second round draft pick. Absolutely. And then too, like, I'm sorry to cut you. I just got one question for you, and I'll give it right back. All the names that I just ran off to you, like right now in his career, would you want Paul Millsap to have a bigger role in that offense? Or do you want him just to be, kind of ring the bell whenever it's asked of him, which he does still. Like he still does that.
He does, definitely. He definitely, he's with the guy we just talked about, Marcus Smart, and I think, obviously, personally, think he's a lot better overall talent-wise. But they do kind of the same thing. That are able to, play whatever part they need to play. And, you made some good points. He was one of the few ones that I saw that I even kind of questioned. Victor Oladipo, if he's healthy and returns to form, he definitely belongs at least this high. But, I don't think that it doesn't look like that's in the cards for him, but hopefully it is. Other guy, where is it? I had it for a second. I've lost it.
Well, while you're looking, I just want to say for Paul Millsap, he did average almost 12 points per game this last year. But if you look at his efficiency, right, from inside the 3-point line, he was 50% from the floor. From outside the 3-point line, he was 43% from the floor, right? So that all boils down to about 48% overall, right? So his free throw, he wasn't a liability there, shot 74% there, gave you about 7 rebounds per game, while Nikola Jokic is averaging a double-double. He gives you a steal and a block a game and turns the ball over less than 2 times a game.
Right. And, he's a veteran NBA player. He does all the little things, like you said. He doesn't really make mistakes. And, I probably overlooked some of that stuff thinking about him. You made a good case. He just, like I said, I can't really hardly find a guy that I don't feel like belongs in this group. So he was almost kind of a reach. The other one.
But again, he was on that line for me as well. So I totally get that and understand that.
And the other one, I'm not sure if you already mentioned him, or maybe you're higher on him than I thought, and even higher than I am, is I don't remember last week's list too well. Did you have DeMar DeRozan on either of your tiers last week?
DeMar DeRozan, no, I did not.
You have not named him yet. Okay.
Nope, not yet.
Then I don't have too much to say about it. I wasn't sure if he was last week, or because I had a hard time figuring out where to put him.
Yeah, and it looks like you had him pretty high on high-end starters, and he's in, prelude. He's in tier 4 for me, which I have labeled demi stars, and I think that he's one of the most underappreciated players in the entire NBA. Like, to me, he's like, I like to try to correlate players from like previous generations. Maybe you've picked up on this. Like, I'll say that James Harden is this generation's Carmelo Anthony, right? Like, great scorer. Melo was a great rebounder. Harden's a great passer. Neither one of them are, widely respected for their defense, right? And they're just heavy volume scorers. Sure, they're really good at it, but what does it do for their team? You know what I mean? Like, it'll help carry them to some kind of big games, but I mean, they kind of reap what they sow a little bit by their playing style, right? Like, I kind of say that DeMar DeRozan is I see a little bit of Rip Hamilton in him, right? Like, Rip Hamilton was a great mid-range scorer. Anytime that he'd come off a screen to that elbow, it was automatic. DeMar DeRozan, for the life of him, for whatever reason, he still shoots threes. Sometimes a little bit, maybe not really, but still, he's not a great 3-point shooter, but he's a really, really good mid-range player and is a great passer. He's actually somewhat capable of a defensive player. Rip obviously has the edge on him on that end for me, but I just think that they're both kind of underappreciated in their generation when they're surrounded by other great perimeter talent. You just kind of almost forget about them.
And, part of the reason that I had so much trouble where to put him is because, for starters, I think he kind of got a bad rap when he left Toronto, just for the fact that everybody acts like if you're not good enough to be the number 1 guy on a championship team, you're not worth anything. Like, being the second or third best guy on a really good team is still really good in the NBA, But on the other side, all he really does that's elite is his scoring. You know, he doesn't really rebound that well. He doesn't really get a lot of assists. He's, you know, his numbers defensively aren't bad, but they're not, you know, great.
Over the top, yeah.
But he can't shoot threes. He's not a modern NBA player at all, but he still finds, you know, the creases and the places to get his shots off, and he still makes it work. And you know, so I think he was originally a lot lower on my list.
Mm-hmm.
When I went back and looked at it and thought to myself, like, you know, it was hard to evaluate San Antonio. They had a lot of injuries and they had a down year for them. But where would they have been without him? You know, it would have been real bad. You know, he was the one. Him and LaMarcus Aldridge were really all they had to write home about this year. All the young guys seemed like they were out every other game. But he was one that I just kind of wanted to get your thoughts on, just because I had trouble kind of placing him.
I mean, something still needs to be said for a guy who can go out and consistently give you 20 a night. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Like, I think that does obviously bring value to a team. Now, he's also kind of, you know, there wasn't a lot of spacing around him too. So like that's that eye test feature. You know, our president of Off the Ball Network, Chris LeBron, is really high on Cole Anthony, whereas I am not. But I get his case when he brings up that the spacing that North Carolina had this season didn't really do him any favors. I kind of look at DeMar DeRozan this last year and like, okay, he had him, LaMarcus Aldridge, Rudy Gay, you know, DeJounte Murray, Derek White. Like, they're just mismatched pieces. Like, each one of these guys would almost be better away from each other. You know what I mean? And I think
seem like they fit very well together.
Yeah, and DeMar, like, he's almost like a poor man's Jimmy Butler, right? Like, he gives you some defense. He's not elite. He's like great value Jimmy Butler, and I really don't mean that disrespectfully.
He's like Jimmy Butler for the first 3 quarters of the game, and then Jimmy Butler takes it into another gear down the stretch, and DeMar doesn't have that, I think.
Yeah, he's like the opposite like end of Jimmy Butler coming out of college. Right? Like Jimmy Butler like came into the NBA with something to prove because he was the last pick in the first round, whereas DeMar DeRozan was kind of like, okay, he was very heralded coming out of college, and you know, just kind of played like it was owed to him. You know what I mean? But he's still very effective, very productive. But because he doesn't have like that sexy play style that everybody, you know, just wants everyone to have, it's just like, whatever. He's almost like in an Andrew Wiggins vein, which is funny because you have them both in your same, you know, well, almost in your same tiers. They're, you know, a tier separated.
And, you know, tier 5, when you think about it, sounds kind of low for some of these guys. You know, he's in the 5th best tier in the NBA, but my 4th tier is all-stars. And there's not a whole lot of guys on here that you would argue would have been all-stars. Maybe a couple that will be. There's some that will be for sure.
There's probably about 4 or 5 on your list that I could see being an all-star. But that's what I was saying earlier. Like, I have my tier 5 listed as super starters, but I have a former league MVP on here. I have multiple time all-stars on this team. You know what I mean? Like, the end, you know, as we get higher, our tiers get lower. My tier 4, believe it or not, is actually like, I think one name short, right? Like, it's 21 instead of 22. So my demi stars and my super starters are actually pretty even, but then it thins out from tier 3 on.
Right. And I just wanted to kind of highlight that, you know, when you're just looking at it right here, like tier 5, like I really like his game, but tier 3 is like the best of the best. Tier 2 is like otherworldly, and, you know, we'll get to that eventually. So it's just, you know, if your favorite player on here is lower in a tier than you think, you got to realize like the amount of players we evaluated is like the 4 best guys on every team, and that's it. So realistically, if it was spread out evenly, they'd all be starters. So, you know, we kind of tried to do what we could with that end of it. One guy I do want to kind of talk about a little bit, because I've had I almost forgot. I want to talk to you about what you just said about Cole Anthony a little bit. I've been dying to talk about this. I'm not really big on him either. And here's what I see, and it that worries me. Do you remember, where did Kyrie Irving go to college?
He went to Duke.
And he was treated like a god, wasn't he? I mean, he was so good.
I think he played like 3 games or something crazy like that. He got injured.
But everybody loved him. You know what I mean? Like, he got media treatment like he was, the next coming of Michael Jordan to some extent. Everybody was ranting and raving about him. And do you remember who came in after him as the point guard of Duke?
Oh, you're putting me on the spot. I can't remember off the top of my head.
Austin Rivers.
Austin Rivers, yep.
And Austin Rivers came into Duke expecting the Kyrie Irving treatment. And
he was pretty well renowned too as high school.
He was, but it became apparent real quick that he wasn't on the level of Kyrie Irving.
Correct.
And he kind of never really figured that out. And that kind of followed him around the first 4 or 5 years of his career, where he just, we talk all the time about these guys having, delusional confidence in themselves, but there's a limit to that where it can actually hurt you if you go too far the other way. You sometimes got to realize who you are. And
one would argue that the perception of Jimmy Butler, even just 2 seasons ago, because he thought that highly of himself, like people were calling him like a detriment to a locker room.
He was a cancer.
Right.
When it turns out it was probably the other way around, and it seems like Embiid and Simmons are hard to get motivated. It seems like Karl-Anthony Towns is hard to get motivated, and Jimmy Butler is like, his baseline is like 100. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But at the same time, I get what you're saying, but he's always backed it up pretty much since day one.
We just forget.
We do, and it doesn't seem like it makes sense. But when you watch him, I mean, you can't deny it. Yeah. So, I lost my place. Sorry.
You were talking about Cole Anthony. You were kind of equating. You were equating him to Kyrie Irving.
Lost my train of thought there, man.
No, you're fine.
So I just feel like Cole Anthony kind of has this air about him, like he's just better than he really is. And I worry that he's not going to fit into a locker room right away, and that he may kind of struggle with that, because I don't know how good he's going to be this year. I think he could turn into a pretty good NBA player, but I don't know if right out of the gate he's going to be the player that he thinks he's going to be. And he seems like he's got the personality where he's going to kind of, come in and try to be like one of the big dogs. And I just don't see that from him. Not that I don't think he's going to be a good player, but I just thought that was kind of something that it reminded me a lot of Austin Rivers, because I always got that feeling from Austin Rivers. Like he just felt like he was better than everybody else. And there's
his dad turned out to be a really good NBA coach and a pretty decent NBA player too. So,
right. And I think that probably is actually like a negative for him, because everybody sees the entitled coach's son. His daddy played in the NBA, so he thinks he's great. Even if he is, somebody's going to say that about him. So it's a little bit perception, a little bit how you kind of shape that perception. And I think
Cole does have Greg Anthony as his father too.
Right.
So there is that.
Right.
It's funny that
you grew up around NBA guys.
Mm-hmm.
So it's hard not to have that extreme confidence when you kind of tested yourself against those guys.
Yeah, I mean, when your DNA, like it's in your DNA, like that's what everyone's like. As soon as DNA, he's got to be great. Like it doesn't always work out like that. Ask Michael Jordan's, kiddos. But
I had one or two more things real quick. I wanted to get your thoughts on one thing. So when you were doing this evaluation, how hard was it for you to determine, okay, this guy's a great scorer, but that's all he does, and then here's this guy that isn't as good of a scorer, not, really a big time offensive threat, but he does everything else really well. Like, kind of go through like how you determined where you put guys in that sense.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that kind of like how you did, right? Like you started out putting guys where you think that they were supposed to be, right? Then you did your investigations and you looked at the analytics and things like that. You took a whole round measure, and that helped shift guys around. And, we talked to each other and we were like, oh yeah, I forgot about this guy. Like, how did I forget about this guy? And then, then we had to go through the process again and sit down and like, okay, like, and you went through it even in more detail, right? Like not only did you break them down into tiers, but within that tier, you rank them numerically, and maybe that added more pressure to you. I don't know, but
I was stressed out around the middle of the 5th tier. I was like, why am I even ranking these guys? This is ridiculous. They're exactly the same.
Right.
It was,
and then
I got a little flustered a couple times trying to figure it out.
And then when I had these like rough little, amoebas almost, right? Like I didn't have any like system or structure to it. I just had names and I'm grouping them. I'm like, all right. I looked at these guys analytically. I watched them all play several times, multiple times, like hours of film I've watched on all of these guys. You know, I have them shaped somehow. I'm not even going to bother numbering them because I'm going to drive myself nuts.
Right.
But I want to group them into who I think in all likeness, like how do they equate to winning? You know what I mean? Like then I'm like, okay, you know, Marcus Smart may not be the biggest name, but he impacts winning. You know, like who would I rather have between, you know, Drummond or LaMarcus Aldridge? You know what I mean? Like, you know, it's almost like like the project really unfolded in front of me, really is what it turned out to be. And then I'm like, who would I, and then I got to the point when I got like to names that were just so similar statistically, you know, team wins and all of that. And I'm just like, at the end of the day, like who would I just rather have, you know? And then and also when I'm looking at these tiers, I'm naming them, like I didn't have the names picked out. I'm like, okay, like all of these guys in one group, what would I call them? Okay, like they're steady starters, you know, they, you know, you can put them in a starting rotation and they can help your team win. All right. The next group, super starters. All right. They're better than these guys, but they're worse than these guys, right? And so they're steady starters, or I'm sorry, super starters.
Right.
And then my 3 and 4, I'm like, all right, what would I do if my stars and my super starters had a baby? You know, like that's what I looked at that tier. Like, okay, they're demi stars, right? Like it's like, you know, a god and a human. You know, had a, like Greek mythology roped into there too, right? So it was basically just at the end of it when it got so narrow. I was just like, who would I just rather have in this tier?
Right.
Like, who fits where? Like that. At the end of it, after everything, it did come down to a human element for me at the end of it. So.
Okay. Yeah, I just kind of feel like looking over my list, and now that we're going back over it live and doing this together, it's first off, it's good to do because we kind of see some things that maybe we would change, or maybe that we kind of are solidified in our beliefs on. So that's cool. But I almost kind of feel like, I almost kind of feel like I overdid it on not big time scorers that just score. I kind of knocked just about every guy that doesn't do anything else real well. But, you know, like we were just saying, you know, scoring 20 points a game in the NBA is incredible. You know, and these guys are so good, it's unreal. You know, there's a lot of college stars that can't even get on the court in the NBA. And they're 10 times better than anybody you and I have ever played with most of the time. You know what I mean? And it's just
absolutely.
So I kind of like the guys that give you a little bit of everything. But me too. I also feel like I maybe did a little bit of a disservice to some of the guys that just really light up the scoreboard. And then the last guy that I just kind of wanted to discuss real quick is Andre Drummond. He's kind of a polarizing player, I think, in today's NBA, because any other time period in the history of basketball, and he would be one of the highest paid, most talked about guys, I think, in the league. You know, it's 15 rebounds a game and 18 points a game for like 3 or 4 years in a row now. And the talk about him is he's a dinosaur and he doesn't belong in the NBA, and like just doesn't, you know, he doesn't fit the NBA anymore. And I just recently watched the movie Moneyball, and it's, you know, it's about the Oakland Athletics and how they found value in all these players that the league didn't think had any value. And, you know, there's a lot to be said about guys that maybe, you know, the league's going small. Everybody's small ball. Well, look who just won the finals. The Lakers were huge. You know, they went extra big and just said, all right, we'll put our good big guys against your good little guys and see what happens. And it worked out. And so I do think
they did have like one of the best players to ever play on the team. That helps.
And they had the big man they had was awful good too.
But you bring up a good point, because the NBA is a copycat league. Like someone's going to look at the Lakers and be like, oh, they're huge, we just need big guys. And they're going to completely ignore that. What we just said, that LeBron James is, you know, one of, if not the best players to ever do it. That's like everybody trying to emulate the Golden State Warriors, right? Like not everybody can shoot like Steph Curry and Klay Thompson. Like that's why it works, is because they had the exact personnel necessary to make it work.
You know, to that point, the Houston Rockets haven't really been a good 3-point shooter, like a great 3-point shooting team the last 4 or 5 years. They're pretty good. They seem like it because they take 50 or 60 a game. Yeah. They only shoot like 33%. It's not that great. You know, they're not the Golden State Warriors, and that's the difference. You know, you can't do what other guys can do, because that's why they're so good, because only they can do it. And, you know, so like you said, somebody's going to say, well, look at the Clippers. They got torched by Jokic, and they didn't have a good enough center. They need to get a big time center. The Celtics, they didn't have a big enough center. They need to get a big center. A couple years ago, nobody wanted big centers. And it goes back and forth. There's always ebbs and flows. And I just think Drummond is a guy that kind of got lost in the shuffle for a while, but he's always been the same player. And I think you're going to start seeing he's got more value than maybe they kind of try to give him credit for. And I had a hard time not putting him higher than I did on my list.
So I didn't have him as super starters. I had him as a steady starter. And the reason for that is like I put a premium of being able to stay on the floor in almost any situation. There are instances where Drummond just becomes a detriment to his team. He can't stay on the floor. He's not a great, as much as you point to the scoring and the rebounding, he's not a great defensive center. Like he's not that big of a deterrent. He's actually pretty foul prone. You know what I mean?
You kind of have to take him off the court in free throw situations too, because he's awful.
Exactly. And so
he's
like
not a little better, but he's awful.
Well, and that's the thing too. Like I keep bringing up this cake analogy, right? Like we both are looking at the same piece of cake, but like, maybe you like corner pieces and maybe I want my name on it. You know what I mean? Like I want this part that says happy birthday.
A frosting guy.
I love frosting. So there you go. Yeah. I like the frosting, but there we go. So like, you value him because he's a walking double-double. He's very physical. There's little that an opposing defense can do to stop him when on offense, right? But like you look at that part. I look at the part where like he can get played off the floor pretty quick.
He can't stay on court defensively against a team like Golden State. Not really.
And he can't create his own offense. Like I put a premium on that. Like if you can't create your own offense, your defense better be like one of the best in the entire NBA. Like if you can't stay on the floor, when you're on the floor, you better be able to dominate multiple areas of a game. And like that's just how I look at it, right? So
are his numbers empty numbers to you, kind of?
So like I used to be of that mindset where like he and Hassan Whiteside are another guy where you like look at these empty calorie numbers and stuff like that. At the end of the day, like those numbers like represent like what actually happened during the game. Like, so it's not like he put up fake numbers. Like those numbers like actually happened. He did score 18 points in a game. He did pull down 15 rebounds. Like, but where I think that empty calorie piece comes in is like, how hard does he try? Like we get that a lot with Joel Embiid. Like, man, I would love to be able to be so half-heartedly like into basketball to where I can just accidentally get 30 and 15. You know what I mean? Like, how do you just accidentally get that? Like, say Shaquille O'Neal got the same criticism in his playing time. Now that he's gone, like everybody's like, "Oh, look at Shaq's number." Like Shaq had a good time playing basketball.
People that are saying that were talking crap about all he did was push guys over and dunk. He couldn't really play.
Yeah. So I mean, like, it's all about perception. And you brought that up earlier. Like, I love doing this. Like, this was a fun exercise. I would encourage anybody who's watching or listening to do something similar.
I'm already looking forward to doing it again next year because I already see kind of things that I would change a little bit or how I would hone my, kind of the way I did it and what I would do a little bit differently. I would probably put a little bit more emphasis on a total body of work because I didn't really put any on that. Yeah. I would probably put a little bit more emphasis on projection for younger guys too. Because if you're looking at my list and thinking this is like where I think these guys are going to be all year or belong for their career, like that's crazy. Like there's some guys on this list that I think are going to end up on these two lists that are going to end up being way higher than I have them now. And some guys that a couple of years ago were way higher than I have them now. So, there's a little bit on either side that I could probably, take into account a little bit better for next year. So I'm excited to do it again.
Yeah, and this is a fun series, man. And we're going to get more and more into it as we roll into, we're both going to be unveiling tier 4 together. We're finally going to be on the same page where we have a similar grouping of players, a similar number of players.
And there's a lot of guys that, I know your personal feelings on how they, and whether you like them or not. And I'm pretty surprised with where you put some guys that I thought you would put lower than you did just because you don't like their game, but you did a good job of kind of putting your biases to the side.
I tried really, really hard. And like, maybe I kind of overcompensated with Marcus Smart because I like where you have him. You know what I mean? Like, and the more like when I was talking about, I'm like, man, I had him as a steady starter. Like, but I also considered his role that he wasn't a starter. You know what I mean? So like, he's already a steady starter as a sixth man.
Honestly, if I wasn't quite so nervous about, I'm putting a guy that's, in the running for sixth man of the year in my high end starters category, that's going to sound stupid. If I don't worry about that, I feel like I would have put some of those guys even higher than I did. I almost kind of toned down how I felt about some guys because I felt like a lot of people would disagree, but maybe not. Maybe we know a little bit more than we think.
Yeah. And again, like, this is the fun part where we get to talk about a little bit what happened last year, a little bit what we think is going to happen next year. To some extent, maybe me more than you. But again, like, we didn't really put a lot of rules or preferences or anything like that when we did this. We were just like, okay, let's run with this project, and this is what we got, And our president, Chris LeBron / producer, who came on and helped us out a lot, just popped in and said, "Great show, legends." Chris, really appreciate you, man. You do so much for our network. Yeah, you do so much for our network, man, and it's an honor being able to serve alongside you guys, man. Y'all are all goats. Y'all are all legends. But Austin, I feel like this is a great place for us to kind of transition into our closing segment where we talk about the work that we have going on, future episodes, and things like that. So I'm going to go ahead and give it to you, man. What do you want to talk about?
Okay, well, we were supposed to do our first episode of our fantasy show this week, but schedules just weren't matching up, and I wasn't going to be able to do back-to-back shows. I didn't get home in time to do it today. So I do have a co-host possibly lined up. We're going to do a test episode this week, and if it goes well, we're going to post it, and we're going to have the fantasy show is going to be up for next week for sure, finally. I'm pretty sure it's going to go well from the initial meeting that I've had with him. He definitely knows his stuff, and he's excited to do it like I am. That's something to look forward to. It's going to be called the Sharp Money Fantasy Show. It's going to have a little bit of betting tips. It's going to be a little bit of DFS, a little bit of Dynasty. The first episode, I'm going to kind of go in depth on how you really value defensive players, individual defensive players for fantasy, because there's not a whole lot of leagues that really do it. And even with the leagues that do it, it's hard to find a whole lot of content on, what is valuable in defensive players, because it's not probably what you would think. So it'll be a pretty interesting show. I'm excited to do it. I'm working on an article. You kind of inspired it a little bit. You did your, how nervous should you be where your team's drafting? I'm doing a list of the best and the worst draft picks of every franchise's history. And I'm not taking into account trades or anything. It's what team drafted you. So Kobe Bryant is on the list as the Charlotte Hornets' best draft pick, even though he never played a minute for them.
So Dirk, is he on the Milwaukee Bucks?
He's not on the article, but if he was the best draft pick ever, he would be.
Okay.
But I don't think he is.
Okay. I mean,
might be though. I have to look at it again. I might be thinking of somebody else, but if I haven't finished it. So but there were some interesting ones, and there were some really bad ones. There were some, number 5 overall picks that have like negative every advanced metric. There was one guy that played 7 games, and there was one guy that was behind, had less win shares than 2 guys that played less than 10 career games, and he played like 130. So there were some real duds. So not everybody's the NBA is not really that good at drafting. If you're really honest about it, it's hard.
It's a tough science.
5 really get really hit. So
it's almost like how we were doing our tiers, right? Like it's almost like that same type of thing. Like, do you value what they did as full body of work? Do you value their upside? Do you value, the numbers? Do you value the eye test? Like it's the exact same thing. It's all evaluating talent.
And then too, it's also, if you're a fan of some of these teams, it's almost heartbreaking to look at who they could have had and what happened. A lot of those trades were done before the draft ever even happened. So they were already going to that team and they told them to draft that guy. But just imagine if, Kobe Bryant, Charlotte would be a completely different franchise. The Lakers would be a completely different franchise. Would completely change the whole face of the league if they hadn't done that. So it'd be a pretty fun article.
All right, cool deal, man. And you can check out that article. Mine is still up there. Austin just alluded to it. How worried should you be on where your team is selecting this year based off of their previous seasons? All of those things and more are all available on the Off the Ball Network website at offtheballnetwork.com. Highly encourage you guys to go and check that out. As for me, we have our football show that has been created and is going to be still in its development stages. It's called See You Sunday, where we get you ready for all games going from Sunday to that following Thursday, which Thursday night football should look like another great matchup again, where we have the Seahawks and the Cardinals. I'm going to be with, Couch Coach Live, a couple other folks. Austin, you gave me your picks. I'm not sure if you're going to be able to be there or not.
But, I think I can hop on if you guys got room. I don't think I've got anything going on.
It's an open invitation, man.
I got to ask the boss. I got to make sure my wife's okay with it.
I totally understand that. But we have that going on. This Sunday, Austin and I are going to be joined. We talked about it earlier by Coach Fa and Couch Coach Live. We're going to be doing our coaching evaluation on the 10 teams dating all the way back to when John Beilein was fired and JB Bickerstaff was named as his potential long-term replacement, all the way up until Oklahoma City hiring it's really hard to say. It's like,
I can't even begin to pronounce it.
We'll have a better pronunciation for you here on Sunday.
Right, let's save it for next week so we don't disrespect the guy.
Right. Yeah, we don't want to. We just learned how to say Bjorkren, right? So we'll keep that trend going. But we're going to be talking about all the way from Cleveland's coaching change all the way up until just yesterday or the day before Oklahoma City's coaching change. So you're going to have some fresh news. It did. We were waiting on to do this show. We're going to be putting our rankings to the side, so it's not going to be a super long episode where we're doing all of this plus another segment, right?
The rankings have to be separate. We could talk about those for 24 hours straight if we wanted to.
Oh, and then we also next Thursday our rankings are going to be on hold again, so you got to wait a little bit longer for the rest of our rankings. We're going to have to
stretch it out. You guys are just going to have to wait. Sorry.
Yep, for our top 4 tiers, but we're gonna have David Shepard. Austin, you're more familiar with him than I. Do you want to go ahead and give?
Yeah, he's just a Twitter follow that I've liked for a long time. He does like full length podcasts, but what I like he does like a little 6 or 7 minute video of basically the topic, the hot points of every episode he does, and he posts that on his Twitter. So it's kind of a quick way to get the important content that he's putting out there. But he is a writer for CBSSports.com. He used to be an ESPN researcher. So I'm really excited to just interview him about like his career path. He's worked actually, I think 2 different times for ESPN. I was looking at his LinkedIn profile. Sorry, David, if I'm wrong on that, but it looked like it. That's how it looked. And then he's had a lot of pretty interesting jobs. And I've always kind of thought it would be cool to be like a statistics researcher or like the guy that gets the imaging and the stats for that segment of the show. I always thought that would be kind of an interesting career. And I'm pretty interested to see what he has to say about that. And then we're also going to get his thoughts because he's been doing this a lot longer than we have. He's a little bit more of an expert maybe than us. So we're going to get kind of his thoughts on the upcoming season and just how everything's been so sped up and what he thinks that's going to what kind of difference he thinks that's going to make.
Yeah, so we got 2 really great shows coming up, Sunday and then that following Thursday. Thursday is going to be recorded a little bit earlier, around 6:30, just to kind of fit David.
And for anybody that watches us that hasn't watched those guys, what are you doing? Because those guys are great. They're so funny. It's going to be a fun show.
Bring a drink, bring a laugh, bring a friend, tell your friends, because I guarantee you that we're going to have a good time when we have our buddies Coach Fa and Couch Coach Live here on the show. We got the best coaches that Off the Ball Network have to offer. It's even in their name, so that they're good. So please come.
If you're called Coach, it's just you're called Coach. Everybody gets it. You know why.
We're just going to be facilitating questions. We're going to be. I'm for real. I'm going to have a drink in my hand. I'm just going to ask questions. I'm going to let these dudes do what they do best and bring the entertainment. Austin and I will just try our best to keep up with those fine gentlemen.
We'll throw our usual numbers and stuff in there and our note and our wherewithal about the game, and they'll provide the fun.
Yeah,
I know personally, I can admit that I think I'm a lot funnier than I probably really am. So it'll be nice to actually have some fun guys on the show.
As long as you think you're funny, bro, that's all that matters.
Exactly. Right? I don't care if anybody else laughs. I'm laughing. I'm making these jokes for me, man.
Yep. There you go. All right. Well, we don't really have anything else other than that in the works. Of course, our vice president, Jeff Hunt, is stirring the pot just like he always does with his power rankings. His power rankings for week 9, last I looked, were like over 20,000 views. And the ones that just released for week 10, like, less than 3 days ago, are already at like 10,000 views. So he's doing his normal stirring of the pot. Be sure to check out all the great work that all of our gentlemen do. If I ran down the entire list, we would be here for another 15 minutes. I don't want to do that. Right. But if you are interested and I have intrigued you, please go check out offtheballnetwork.com, because all of their articles and all of their podcasts are conveniently located in one spot for you. So please go and check that out at offtheballnetwork.com. Austin, man, we have reached the conclusion of episode 21? 21.
Seems like the numbers have jumped up pretty quick here. It's been fun doing a couple shows a week. We had that time off. I was itching to do it. I'm glad we're back at it.
I had to move across country, but yes, that little thing. We are in episode 21 of a show that I'm thrilled to death to be able to do this with you, man. You're
loving it.
Best co-host that a guy could have ever asked for, man.
Well, thank you. I feel the same way about you.
Again, happy anniversary, brother. Go spend time with Mrs. Carr.
Yeah. And go up there and make. She's not already asleep. I don't think she is, but she might be.
I think my wife is still doing college work. But anyway, let's let these people go.
I'm always in bed early.
Us too, dude. I live in my PJs. Are you crazy?
All right, man. Well, it's been fun. Let's let these guys get out of here.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much for watching and listening. Support the show. It's available wherever you get your podcasts. Reach out to us if you do happen to have a hard time getting a hold of it. Again, it's on offtheballnetwork.com. It's really easy. So please check that out. Follow us on Instagram, Twitter at BTG NBA Pod. And you guys can find us everywhere else. We're out there. So YouTube, please go and do that.
Everywhere.
YouTube, go look up Breaking the Game. We're on there. We're everywhere. So Austin, before we go, man, say something nice to the people.
Like I always say, thanks for listening. You take time out of your busy day and your busy schedule to listen to us rant and rave about basketball players that sometimes some of you may have never even really known much about. But so thanks for listening to us. I hope you learned something every episode. And if you didn't, I hope you get something good out of it. I'm sure you can find something good in every episode. I personally think we've gotten better every week. And so, stay along for the ride and see where we go. I appreciate all the support up to this point.
And as always, be nice to one another. Don't be a racist. Wear your mask where you're supposed to wear your mask. Wash your hands, regardless if there's a, disease or an outbreak at all. Brush your teeth. Be nice to each other. Change your clothes, all that fun stuff.
Don't wear dirty underwear.
Don't wear dirty underwear, and be nice. Just be nice. That's all we ask of you. But for the Breaking the Game podcast, for my co-host Austin Carr, you guys have been awesome. We will catch up with you guys next time. Much love, everybody.
Have a good one.